Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. And this is the Antiquity of Masonry from the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry by Albert G. Mackey. Antiquity of Freemasonry. Years ago, in writing an article on this subject under the impressions made upon me by the fascinating theories of Dr. Oliver, though I never completely accepted his views, I was led to place the organization of Freemasonry as it now exists at the building of Solomon's Temple. Many years of subsequent research have led me greatly to modify the views I had previously held. Although I do not rank myself among those modern iconoclasts who refuse credence to every document whose authenticity, if admitted, would give to the order a birth anterior to the beginning of the last century, I confess that I cannot find any incontrovertible evidence that would trace Masonry as now organized beyond the building corporations of the Middle Ages. In this point of view, I speak of it only as an architectural brotherhood, distinguished by signs, by words, and by brotherly ties which have not essentially changed, and by symbols and legends which have only been developed and extended, while the association has undergone a transformation from an operative art to a speculative science. But then these building corporations did not spring up in all their peculiar organization, different as it was from that of other guilds, like autochthonies, from the soul. They too must have had an origin and an archetype from which they derived their peculiar character, and I am induced for that purpose to look to the Roman colleges of artificers, which were spread over Europe by the invading forces of the empire. But these have been traced to Noma, who gave to them that mixed practical and religious character which they are known to have possessed, and in which they were imitated by the medieval architects. We must, therefore, look at Freemasonry in two distinct points of view. First, as it is, a society of speculative architects engaged in the construction of spiritual temples, and in this respect a development from the operative architects of the 10th and succeeding centuries, who were themselves offshoots from the traveling Freemasons of Como, who traced their origin to the Roman colleges of builders. In this direction, I think, the line of descent is plain, without any demand upon our credulity for assent to its credibility. But Freemasonry must be looked upon at also from another standpoint. Not only does it present the appearance of a speculative science based on an operative art, but it also very significantly exhibits itself as the symbolic expression of a religious idea. In other and plainer words, we see in it the important lesson of eternal life, taught by a legend which, whether true or false, is used in Masonry as a symbol and an allegory. But whence came this legend? Was it invented in 1717 at the revival of Freemasonry in England? We have evidence of the strongest circumstantial character derived from the Sloan manuscript number 3329, recently exhumed from the shelves of the British Museum, that this very legend was known to the Masons of the 17th century at least. Then, did the operative Masons of the Middle Ages have a legend also? The evidence is that they did. The Compagnons de la Tour, who were the offshoots of the Old Master Guilds, had a legend. We know what the legend was, and we know that its character was similar to, although not in all the details precisely the same, the Masonic legend. It was, however, connected with the Temple of Solomon. Again, did the builders of the Middle Ages invent their legend, or did they obtain it from some old tradition? The question is interesting, but its solution either way would scarcely affect the antiquity of Freemasonry. It is not the form of the legend, but its spirit and symbolic design with which we have to do. The legend of the third degree as we now have it, and as we have had it for a certain period of 250 years, is intended by a symbolic representation to teach the resurrection from death and the divine dogma of eternal life. All Masons know its character, and it is neither expedient nor necessary to dilate upon it. But can we find such a legend elsewhere? Certainly we can. Not indeed the same legend, not the same personage as its hero, not the same details, but a legend with the same spirit and design. A legend, funeral in character, celebrating death and resurrection, solemnized in lamentation and terminating in joy. Thus, in the Egyptian mysteries of Osiris, the image of a dead man was borne in an ark or coffin, by a procession of initiates, and this enclosure in the coffin or internment of the body was called the aphanism or disappearance, and the lamentation for him formed the first part of the mysteries. On the third day after the internment, the priests and initiates carried the coffin, in which was also a gold vessel, down to the river Nile. Into the vessel they poured water from the river, and then with a cry of, "We have found him, let us rejoice," they declared that the dead Osiris had descended into Hades, had returned from thence, and was restored again to life. And the rejoicings which ensued constituted the second part of the mysteries. The analogy between this and the legend of Freemasonry must be at once apparent. Now, just such a legend, everywhere differing in particulars, but everywhere coinciding in general character, is to be found in all the old religions, in sun worship, in tree worship, in animal worship. It was often perverted, it is true, from the original design. Sometimes it was applied to the death of winter and the birth of spring, sometimes to the setting and the subsequent rising of the sun, but always indicating a loss and a recovery. Especially do we find this legend, and in a purer form, in the ancient mysteries, at Samothrace, at Eleusis, at Byblos, in all places where these ancient religions and mystical rites were celebrated. We find the same teachings of eternal life inculcated by the representation of an imaginary death, an apotheosis. And it is this legend, and this legend alone, that connects speculative Freemasonry with the ancient mysteries of Greece, of Syria, and of Egypt. The theory, then, that I advance on the subject of the Antiquity of Freemasonry is this. I maintain that, in its present peculiar organization, it is the successor, with certainty, of the building corporations of the Middle Ages, and through them, with less certainty, but with great probability, of the Roman colleges of artificers. Its connection with the Temple of Solomon as its birthplace may have been accidental, a mere arbitrary selection by its inventors, and bears, therefore, only an allegorical meaning, or it may be historical, and to be explained by the frequent communications that at one time took place between the Jews and the Greeks and the Romans. This is a point still open for discussion. On it I express no fixed opinion. The historical materials upon which to base an opinion are as yet too scanty, but I am inclined, I confess, to view the Temple of Jerusalem and the Masonic traditions connected with it as a part of the great allegory of Masonry. But in the other aspect in which Freemasonry presents itself to our view, and to which I have already adverted, the question of its antiquity is more easily settled, as a brotherhood composed of symbolic masters and fellows and apprentices, derived from an association of operative masons, fellows, and apprentices, those building spiritual temples as these build material ones. Its age may not exceed 500 or 600 years, but as a secret association containing within itself the symbolic expression of a religious idea, it connects itself with all the ancient mysteries which, with similar secrecy, gave the same symbolic expression to the same religious idea. These mysteries were not the cradles of Freemasonry. They were only its analogues. But I have no doubt that all the mysteries had one common source. Perhaps, as it has been suggested, some ancient body of priests. And I have no more doubt that Freemasonry has derived its legend, its symbolic mode of instruction, and the lesson for which that instruction was intended, either directly or indirectly, from the same source. In this view, the mysteries become interesting to the Mason as a study, and in this view only. And so, when I speak of the antiquity of Masonry, I must say, if I would respect the axioms of historical science, that its body came out of the Middle Ages, but that its spirit is to be traced to a far remote period. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Rosies. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.